It is January the 30th, 1948, and in the newly independent nation of India, the life of a man who stood for peace and unity is cut short in a storm of bullets. The man in question is 78-year-old Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, the driving force behind the Indian independence movement. Through his lifelong example of non-violent resistance and civil disobedience of India's British colonial rulers, he became known by the name Mahatma, meaning great soul, and is today seen as the founding father of modern India. However, the path to this independence had not been easily won, and over time it saw India's Hindu and Muslim population begin to diverge, leading to the creation of the two separate states of India and Pakistan against Gandhi's wishes. As the relationship between the two communities plunged into ever deeper hostility, Gandhi's balanced approach to both sides made him a target for assassination. An assassination that, more than 75 years on, shapes how we remember Gandhi and his legacy on India in the present day. Today we look at the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, the murdering of moderation in the name of extremism. To understand Gandhi's assassination, we first have to look at how he rose to become a driving force for his country's independence, a believer in religious unity, and a pillar of non-violence, traits that would one day place him in extremist crosshairs. Born in 1869, as a young man Gandhi took the daunting leap of moving across the world to study law in London. After qualifying and disappointingly learning that employment opportunities in his homeland were scarce, he instead managed to secure short-term legal work in a country that would shape much of his life, South Africa. For it was here in this unjust and segregated society that began the making of Gandhi as we understand him today. Upon arriving, Gandhi instantly felt the sting of discrimination that was inflicted upon the country's Indian community by the ruling white minority, discrimination that also targeted the native South Africans. Incidents where he was thrown out of a first-class train carriage and attacked by a stagecoach driver for refusing to change seats quickly awakened the young Gandhi's political consciousness. Not only did he begin to raise his voice against this discrimination, but also began to formulate his approach for doing so, the approach of civil disobedience. These principles had their roots in Gandhi's religious upbringing. As well as his Hindu faith, he had also been greatly influenced by Jainism, an ancient Indian religion that promoted messages of non-violence and religious tolerance. In 1906, Gandhi utilised these principles to their most significant extent yet, when the colonial government announced plans to register the territory's Indian population. With Gandhi encouraging people to peacefully resist and absorb any punishments inflicted upon them, after 7 long years the government backed down and came to a compromise. This form of protest became known as Satyagraha, or devotion to truth, a philosophy that Gandhi would soon deploy in his homeland to great effect. After 20 years in South Africa, in 1914 Gandhi finally returned to India, ready to use what he had learned to unify his people and illuminate their path to liberation. By 1920 he was the dominant figure in the Indian National Congress political party, or INC. Under Gandhi's watch, over the next decade the INC enacted mass campaigns of civil disobedience and boycotts of British goods, becoming an ever greater thorn in the side of the colonial administration. The authorities threw him in prison for 2 years, but the INC's momentum continued to grow, along with their ambition. From initially seeking greater rights and representation for the Indian people, the party instead began to push to become a self-ruling dominion of the empire, and by 1930, they were demanding complete independence from Britain altogether. Around this time, Gandhi also embarked on the Salt March, a hugely influential satyagraha in protest of Britain's monopoly over India's salt trade. In the following weeks and months, over 60,000 protesters were arrested by the authorities, but it demonstrated the huge influence that Gandhi wielded, and that it was not going away anytime soon. Eventually, in 1935, Britain passed the India Act, at last giving increased autonomy to India's provinces. Whilst this seemed a positive step, the provincial elections that took place 2 years later highlighted the growing inevitability of one of Gandhi's worst fears, religious division. For the INC swept to victory, but did not invite their former allies the Muslim League to form any provincial governments with them. The League represented India's large Muslim population, and following these elections, its leader and former INC member Muhammad Ali Jinnah started to believe that a separate state was needed to safeguard Muslim interests. Independence was drawing closer, but to Gandhi's horror, the tensions between India's Hindus and Muslims were on the rise. The idea of a partition started to emerge on the horizon, and the fuse that would lead to Gandhi's assassination had been ignited. In 1939, India's colonial British rulers entered into the Second World War. With Britain now locked into a long conflict with Germany, resources and manpower soon became desperately needed. Seeking this extra support and also fearful of a potential Japanese invasion of India, in 1942 Britain sent a government minister named Stafford Cripps to India to try and gain Indian assistance in the war efforts. He offered India Dominion status in return, but by now the INC had no more time for compromises. It was independence or nothing. In August of that year, their hostility towards the British escalated when Gandhi demanded that Britain immediately withdraw from India altogether, telling his countrymen that independence was a matter of do or die. The Quit India movement, as it became known, threatened mass civil disobedience to cripple the administration. Unsurprisingly, the British took a rather dim view of it, and within 24 hours Gandhi and several other INC leaders had been thrown in prison, where they would stay for the rest of the war. The Muslim League's attitude was quite different. In 1940 they had passed the Lahore Resolution, which formalised their demand for a separate Pakistan should India become independent. With many INC leaders now out of the picture, the League took the opportunity to back the British war efforts. As a result, back in London the idea of partition slowly started to gain some traction. The gruelling toll of 6 long years of war left Britain economically crippled, and no longer capable of retaining its vast global empire. Britain's post-war Labour government also appeared more open to the idea of Indian independence, and what had once appeared a remote possibility now suddenly seemed to be an inevitability. In spite of independence drawing ever closer, back in India communal relations were about to fall to new depths. Under Gandhi's protege Jawaharlal Nehru, plans for a united federal India fell through, unleashing a vicious new wave of violence. The British Viceroy to India, Lord Mountbatten, even feared the possibility of an all-out civil war, and in the chaos, Britain decided that it was time to grant independence and get out, fast. On June 3, 1947, Mountbatten announced that partition and the independence of both India and Pakistan would come into effect on August 15th, several months ahead of schedule. The issue with this was that it left Britain barely 6 weeks to draw borders, and unsurprisingly this led to disastrous consequences. Around 15 million Hindus and Muslims desperately crossed this hastily drawn border to get to India and Pakistan respectively, and in the turmoil, over 1 million people lost their lives. As someone who had always dreamed of religious unity in a united India, few people were hurt more by the partition than Mahatma Gandhi. Even as relations between the two countries quickly deteriorated into a war over the northern region of Kashmir, he continued to advocate for fairness and reason towards both sides, paying visits to riot-affected areas. It was because of this war that the Indian government, led by Nehru, refused to pay Pakistan money that they were rightfully owed. Disheartened by this unfair act, in January 1948 the aging Gandhi began a fast to demand that India pay. Within 5 days the government backed down, but ironically, this unwavering commitment of fairness towards Pakistan was about to cost Gandhi his life. For India's Hindu nationalists were enraged and plotting their revenge. In the early evening of January 30th, 1948, Gandhi was on his way to a prayer service in the city of New Delhi. As his grandnieces walked him along at a steady pace, the frail Gandhi was suddenly greeted by a man stepping out from the crowd that flanked his path. Preparing to greet him back, Gandhi instead witnessed a man reveal a small pistol from within his clasped hands. In seconds, the man fired 3 bullets into Gandhi's body from point-blank range. According to some accounts, as Gandhi fell to the ground, he put his hand to his head in a gesture of forgiveness towards his assailant. He was rushed back to his residence at Birla House to make him comfortable, but little else could be done for him. Within 30 minutes, Mahatma Gandhi, founding father of the Indian nation, passed away at the age of 78. The volatile political situation had by now swallowed up any space for balance between the two sides, and Gandhi had paid with his life. Gandhi's assassination drew shock and an outpouring of sorrow from around the world. In India, riots intensified and viciously targeted the Muslim population. But who was the man responsible for one of the 20th century's most shocking and infamous assassinations? His name was Nathuram Godse, a 37-year-old Hindu extremist. He was a member of the Hindu Mahasabha political party, a group that promoted an uncompromising form of religious nationalism named Hindutva that advocated Hindu religious hegemony in India. This put them at odds with the more secular INC, and especially with Gandhi's support of fairness and religious unity. A dedicated follower of this hardline ideology, Godse had already made several attempts on Gandhi's life dating back to 1944, including one just 10 days before the successful assassination. One previous attempt had seen him arrested, but Gandhi's policy of not pressing charges saw Godse narrowly escape punishments. At his trial, Godse outlined his belief that Gandhi favoured Muslims over Hindus. He also claimed that Gandhi's non-violent resistance had actually contributed to the partition and all of its bloodshed, and suggested that Gandhi continued to hold far too much power and influence over the Indian government. Despite insisting that there was no conspiracy surrounding the assassination, 7 other people were implicated alongside Godse, all of whom were found guilty. Subsequently, on November 15th, 1949, Godse was hanged at the age of 39. More than 75 years on from that seismic day in Indian history, some questions about Godse's life still rumble on. In particular, it's debated whether or not he was part of the RSS, a political volunteer organisation that also advocated Hindutva ideology. He claimed to have left this in the 1930s, but statements from his family and evidence studied by historians suggest otherwise. Could he simply have been trying to protect that organisation? If you're wondering why this question is especially relevant, it's because of the close ties between the RSS and India's current ruling political party, the BJP. Both organisations broadly reject Godse, but in recent years, some of the more extreme individuals in the BJP have actually sought Godse's rehabilitation. It is perhaps a sign of the complex relationship that some Indian nationalists have with both Gandhi's assassination and with the man himself. An imperfect, yet unique and enduring symbol of national liberation and anti-colonialism. Elements of his Satyagraha philosophy helped inspire later civil rights leaders such as Martin Luther King, but by the time independence had been achieved, its power in a suffocatingly volatile political atmosphere had become greatly diminished. This tension that existed then between India and Pakistan still runs deep in the present day, and whilst Gandhi's reputation in India still remains that of the father of the nation, the ideology of people like Nathuram Godse are still alive and extremely powerful. As always, we hope you enjoyed this video, thank you for watching, subscribe for more from the Assassinations Archive.